Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Set It Off podcast. This is your host Grant Chachere. I'm joined by two special guests, Jake McKeever and Alex Day of College Baseball Central. Welcome, guys.
Excited to be here. Excited to talk some college baseball right around the corner.
Yeah, it's 3 weeks till we get first pitch, and super excited. Been talking a lot of ball lately, and can't wait for the season to start, man.
hmm Yeah, man. So I just want to first pop up the question, Alex. I know we're both gonna be a little biased about this. Jake, maybe not so much, but will LSU repeat as the national champions?
Alex,
Uh,
I'll go ahead and jump in. No, I mean, it's so hard to repeat in college baseball. They lost arguably two of the best college baseball players for a season last year. And I know that the depth's gotten a lot there, but again, Wake's building a monster. I think it kind of woke up a lot of these teams in the SEC that went out and got tremendous players like Tennessee and A&M. I think it's going to be really, really tough for LSU to repeat this year. I think they have the talent to, but it's just so tough.
yeah, no, I agree with Jake. I don't think that they will repeat. I mean, it's possible. They do have enough talent to do it. I just don't know if the stars will align so that it happens, because you need a little bit of luck with baseball.
Mhm.
But
Yep.
like Jake said, Wake's got a beast going, and Florida's stacked. I mean, there's tons of really great talented teams.
Mhm. But I'll say this: do you expect them to go to Omaha? Because I think they still have, like, they might not have the star power that they had last year, but they still have the makeup of a team that will play in Omaha come June.
I don't know. We've been doing deep dives into the ACC, and the way that it's kind of setting up is they'll probably end up with a very, very talented ACC team that's going to give them a run for their money. And I just think it's so tough to get back to Omaha, especially these days. I I think that they have the talent to get back to Omaha, but do they get these breaks again? Um, they had a lot of things go right last year that allowed them to win the national championship, and it's just going to be so tough for kind of that luck to repeat itself.
Yeah, I mean, I've got them in my Omaha 8, but that's I wouldn't be surprised if they don't make it. I'm not, I don't, I wouldn't. I want them to be there. I think they will be there, but it won't surprise me if they don't make it.
hmm And I'll ask because this is pretty much a Louisiana-based show. I like to cover a lot of sports in Louisiana, of course, and that's why I want to start with LSU. But what do you guys think is probably the biggest storyline for LSU come this season?
I would say the complacency of the last two national championships and how much they've flopped in the SEC. I think that's going to be the big storyline is can Jay Johnson kind of manage the expectations of winning a national championship? Because it's something that we've seen in an NIL era that's been really challenging to do. I think that's going to be the biggest storyline is can Jay keep these guys humble? Can Jay keep these guys hungry?
Yeah, I actually don't. I mean, I understand from a national perspective how that would be the story of this team coming into the season, but talking to Jay and talking to some of these players and listening to some of them talk, I'm not worried about this team's mentality. I'm not worried about there being a national championship hangover or them being complacent. I think there's a ton of really good veteran leadership on this team that knows how to win and doesn't accept losing. That will keep them engaged. I really think the story of this team is going to be the pitching staff. The pitching staff on this team is deep and talented. It's probably a better top to bottom pitching staff than they had last year. Now they're good. The hitters are not what they were last year. The offense is not going to be what it was last year. They're not going to be up in the top 5 in the nation in home runs. But you're going to see the offense get a lot more creative this year. There's going to be a lot more hit and runs, some stolen bases, those kinds of things. And the pitching staff is just absolutely loaded. And the fact that, if you look at the projected starting rotation, it's all transfers. I mean, when
Yeah.
you look at Thatcher Hurd, Luke Holman, and Gage Jump, which are predicted your rotation, your weekend rotation for LSU, and they're all transfers. And that just speaks to Jay Johnson being the portal king.
Yeah. And I'll say this, but going off since we're going to pitching, like their pitching situation is very interesting, just because this is like the first time where LSU has three legit, even more than they legit probably have more than three starters. I mean, some of the guys that are probably going to be coming out of the bullpen could easily start for LSU. But then they also have a depth out of the bullpen. Last year, I would say they had the depth, but the issue was, you had three players all go out because of, Tommy John. So, but there's going to be a lot of guys like Griffin Herring's back. Gavin Guidry will be pitching again, who most likely be the closer. But they also brought in transfers like Kate Anderson, Cam Johnson, who's the number one left-handed pitcher in the country. He's coming in. He's going to be coming out of the bullpen, and that guy is scary. I mean, he's throwing 98 miles per hour as a freshman. And he's like 6'4", 230, and I can only imagine how fast he's going to throw by his junior year. But then you also have an interesting guy like DJ Primo, who's already throwing 97. I mean, he didn't even pitch last year. And from talking to a couple of guys on the team, especially it was mentioned today in the media days, like one of the guys has been very impressive has been DJ Primo. So what do you like out of the bullpen this year?
I really like Gavin Guidry. I mean, he kind of burst onto the scene for those of us that don't get to watch LSU as much in Omaha, and really had, I think, one of the best mentalities for somebody his age. I mean, he was pitching on the biggest stage, and it truly didn't phase him. And I know that there were like rumors and murmurs that he wanted to play the field, and I think that kind of is a credit to what the culture that Jay Johnson's built at LSU, that he's comfortable being in that closer role. And you didn't see him transfer or even murmurs of transferring, that he's staying there and he's happy with his role. He's kind of the one guy that I really have to circle in this LSU bullpen. I'm expecting to see him take a huge, huge step forward and maybe even kind of work him way into the starting rotation. I know that I don't really have the insight that y'all have, but he kind of has the talent to be in a rotation.
Yeah, I mean, last year he really lived off his absolutely disgusting breaking ball. His fastball was kind of okay, but he really lived off that breaking ball. And I think, his big thing this year is going to be developing, kind of a second and a third pitch, especially, if you're going to talk about him as a starter, which I don't think he's going to be a starter. But, when I talked to Jay Johnson a couple weeks ago, Jay Johnson called him the most important pitcher in their bullpen. And so he's going to be relied upon heavily on the back end of games. You love his mentality. But I think there's going to be I don't think LSU is going to have like a designated like closer. Like this is the guy that's going to come in. I think it's going to be kind of a closer by committee just because of how much talent they have. And you got to talk about Gavin Guidry, Justin Lohr, the Xavier transfer. I think Cam Johnson's going to come in, in late game situations, and he's going to be trusted with some high leverage opportunities. And then, you mentioned DJ Primo. And then Aiden Moffitt has taken a huge leap over the offseason. He pitched, I think, in a handful of games. He pitched a handful of innings last year, and really struggled with getting the ball across the plate. Big arm. He's been up to 100 miles an hour, but he struggled last year with throwing strikes. But all indications is that he's taken a huge leap in that department. And he's ready to be a big contributor. And then you mentioned Griffin Herring. I mean, he's back. I mean, we haven't even talked about Nate Ackenhausen. I think Nate might slide into that midweek starter. I think that's a good place for either him or Griffin, one of those two guys. I mean, just the insane amount of lefties that this bullpen has. I mean, LSU right now has more left-handed pitching than they have right-handed pitching, which is kind of unheard of.
Right, and I remember Jay Johnson wanted to have an emphasis on having more left-handed guys in the not only just in the starting lineup. I mean, there's already two lefties in the starting lineup too, but you also have a lot of lefties in the bullpen. I remember, like his first year, they only like 2 or 3 lefties. So I mean, it's a huge credit to Jay Johnson and bringing in as many guys as possible, including lefties, which is something that they lacked their first year, and even sometimes last year, I think they kind of lacked having multiple left-handed guys, even though they had Ackenhausen, Riley Cooper, and Griffin Herring. But now they have like 5, 6, 7 guys that they can all rely on. But yeah, and also Justin Lohr, I think is a guy I think he's gonna be extreme. Like I think he might be the first guy out of the bullpen. He's that type of guy, and he can also extend the game as long as Jay Johnson is willing to be out there before he might bring somebody else in. But is there anybody that on LSU that LSU fans may need to look at a little bit harder, despite they of course all these guys are big time players, but coming in. But is there anybody that's really under the radar right now on LSU's team?
I mean, that's almost really tough to say because I feel like they had so many guys that were swapping in and out. But I think a name that LSU fans said I really think should give a second look at is Paxton Kling. I know he really struggled with the strikeouts once he got into SEC play and lost the job. I think he's somebody that I think could kind of burst onto the scene for LSU. I think he's had a more professional approach in the fall camp, and I think he's somebody that LSU fans will kind of throw their head down at the start of the season. But I think he's going to be somebody that plays a big key in this lineup.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly going to have to. He's the guy that's going to be. He's going to be your everyday center fielder. He's, defensively, he's going to be one of the best center fielders in college baseball. But offensively, he's had his struggles at the plate last year. But I think him and Jared Jones both, I think, are going to take big steps forward. And if this team's going to make an Omaha run, they're going to have to take big steps forward. But another name, to kind of that people have kind of been down on and maybe forgotten about is Christian Little. Christian Little had some struggles last year. Jay Johnson kind of talked about that today in media days, and how his development has kind of been kind of rocky. He's got some scars, but I think that you can't replace a guy like him that's just that veteran presence in the bullpen for that pitching staff who's pitched in Omaha twice and has just a ton of SEC innings under his belt and has an opportunity, I think, to really, to show what he can do. This is his last year of eligibility. He was projected, first half, a first round guy coming out of high school and said, no, I'm going to go to Vanderbilt. And it just hasn't really, his college career hasn't gone the way that he wanted it to, but he's a guy I'm really looking forward to watching and seeing if he can really take that next step and be a massive piece for LSU.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also I'll say this: another guy that we probably need to look out more for is there's two guys really, and they're kind of both battling for that other outfielder position. Like, because obviously it's Mac Bingham, and then Paxton Kling is going to be the starting center fielder for LSU. But there's two guys, Zeb Riddell and Jake Brown. Jake Brown, speaking of Jake Brown, he was actually the number one left-handed pitcher coming out of the state of Louisiana. He was the Gatorade player of the year. And he was really kind of brought in to be a pitcher, but because he's so versatile, they're thinking about moving him to the outfield, and he's going to be battling for that outfield spot along with Zeb Riddell. And Zeb Riddell took a redshirt last year, but during the last fall, not this past fall, but like last fall, in the fall of 2022, he was raking it. I mean, he had like 5 or 6 home runs throughout the whole fall camp, and he also impressed well during the scrimmages, but they redshirted him because, I mean, that's how stacked LSU's position group, all of their position players were. So he had a redshirt. But those are two guys I think that you're going to probably be seeing a good bit this year, just because of their ability to just rake. I mean, I think they're going to be two really good hitters and for LSU when their name is called. But I think an interesting thing about LSU is that they have a brand new infield. Obviously, you have Josh Pearson. He's moving to second base. Michael Braswell is transferring over from South Carolina. And that was probably the main takeaway for me during the media days was Michael Braswell, because he actually grew up an LSU fan. As a matter of fact, when he entered the transfer portal, he didn't expect Jay Johnson to call him the very first day he was in the transfer portal. And he actually told everyone there that he broke down crying. That was a pretty good story. But then also you had Jared Jones moving to first base, to kind of having big shoes to fill, because he's I wouldn't say replacing, but he's the successor to Trey Morgan, who's probably one of the best defensive first basemen we probably have ever seen in the sport. And then obviously Tommy White's the only one to return from last year. So how do you think that LSU infield performs this year, especially when the last few seasons, LSU's infield has been probably one of the more critiqued members of this team.
It's going to be a lot of new faces. Like you mentioned, Trey Morgan, I think, is really, really big shoes to fill. But again, Jared Jones started at first very, very early in the season when Trey Morgan was out and left, and then when his shoulder was messed up as well. So he has some SEC experience. And then Michael Braswell, I mean, he doesn't have the arm strength that Jordan Thompson had, but I think he's a little bit more slick fielding. So I think that he's a better fit for somebody like Jay Johnson. And again, I think that there's a lot of fresh faces, but there's a lot to like about this LSU infield.
Yeah, I think Michael Braswell has really been the talk of the fall, and Jay Johnson's super high on him, and I think Josh Pearson moving over to second base. He today at media days, Josh mentioned talking to Gavin Dugas about making the same transition. And Gavin Dugas at times was not the greatest second baseman, as evidenced by the fact that in Omaha him and Jordan Thompson would flip flop for left-handed batters. But he did a really good job, and you got to have Josh Pearson's bat in the lineup because they don't have as many left-handed bats. So, Josh Pearson's got to be at second base. It gives them a lot of lineup flexibility. And Tommy, I expect Tommy to make a big jump this year in his fielding, because he dislocated his shoulder in the first game of the season last year, and he mentioned today during media days that his shoulder popped out at least 20 other times during the season, and he was not healthy at all during the season. And then he had shoulder surgery in the offseason, didn't play all of fall camp. And so I think he's going to make a big jump defensively.
Yeah, and that's kind of his biggest Achilles heel. I think if he can figure out the defense, his draft stock is really going to increase drastically. So I think that that's going to be a big point of emphasis for him, which I'm not saying in years past it wasn't, but that really kind of truly is a $1 million question if he can play defense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, guys. So kind of moving on away from LSU, kind of going more to SEC play because I think it's a huge year for the SEC. I think any of these teams, all these teams are really good. Even to say the bottom feeders of the conference could easily break out. Like I think a team like Mizzou could have kind of a breakaway type of year because I think they have the talent to do so. But they're just in a really tough conference. Who you guys think is the favorite to win the SEC this year?
Alex, I know who you're going to pick, so I don't steal your thunder. You can go ahead and go first.
Oh, who am I going to pick? I'm going to pick Florida, actually. I think Florida, yeah. Florida, I think they've got Jack Caglione. Jake and I are kind of talking, before we started recording, that, he's maybe not the best pitcher, but man, he rakes. They brought in Colby Shelton from Alabama, who had 25 bombs last year. You still got Cade Kurland over there. Ty Evans had an incredible breakout, in Omaha. And so, I mean, this lineup, they're probably, I expect them to lead the country in home runs. And they brought in that they have a freshman pitcher that's going to be starting for them on the weekend, Liam Peterson, who's a beast. Cade Fisher's going to make the jump from the bullpen to the starting rotation. So we'll see how that goes for him. But, I expect big things from Florida.
I'll stay out in the East. I expect Tennessee to be the team that kind of returns to it. I mean, they had, I think, one of the best teams in college baseball history to not win it back in 2022 when they were just beating up on everybody. And last year, it kind of didn't feel fun at times in Knoxville, and they figured it out down the stretch, and it became a lot more fun. But again, I think Tony V, I mean, the pitching that they were able to retain, which, it's in the transfer portal world, there were teams out there that inquired about some of their pitchers entering the portal. And then the flip side of that, the portal giveth, the portal taketh. They brought in Cannon Pleebles. They brought in a ton. They bought Billy Amick. I really expect Tennessee to kind of mesh really, really well and be a team that kind of rolls through the SEC. But again, like you mentioned, I don't really think that there's a team that is far and away the worst team like we've seen in the past with Missouri or Ole Miss last year. Everybody got better, it seemed like, aside from quote unquote LSU, who lost Cruz and Skeens. Everybody got better in the SEC, and that's kind of what you want to see. Is that there's 5 or 6 teams we could ramble off that could easily win the SEC: A&M, Arkansas, LSU. I mean, the best player Charlie Condon's on like the 10th or 12th best team. So there's just a ton of talent all up and down the SEC.
Yeah, and speaking of Charlie Condon, I mean, Georgia is one of those teams I think a lot of people are sleeping on, just because Georgia's always kind of had talent, but they just necessarily had that coach. And I think that I already forgot his name. I know his last name is John. What's his name again? I'm sorry, I'm tripping.
Wes
Wes
Johnson.
Johnson.
I know it's like I was about to say John Johnson. I'm like, no, I think it's not John Johnson. So yeah, Wes Johnson. He was a fantastic pitching coach at LSU, and he's a fantastic pitching coach at every single level of baseball, both college and the pros. I think their pitching, actually, I think will improve because you saw that last year as LSU's pitching did improve. But I think my pick, guys, will probably be Arkansas. They're returning a lot. I think they're going to be a lot healthier this year. Last year, they still were a top 3 SEC team despite battling injuries all throughout
They
their
won
pitcher
the
rotation.
SEC.
They won this. Yeah, they did win the
Yeah,
SEC.
they were the number 1 team in the SEC.
But that's just like, but that's how good they were. It's like, I completely forgot about that. They won the SEC the regular season. I know Vandy won the postseason, but I was sure if Arkansas won the regular season. But Arkansas, I mean, they were battling injuries throughout, and it's pretty. Even though they lost guys, I trust Dave Van Horn, even with losing all those guys, to still be at the very top. And I think their pitcher rotation will be much healthier this year. And then they also return Hunter Hagen, who is,
Hagen Smith.
Hagen Smith, yeah. So, I'm
Hunter Holland's gone.
Hunter,
Tiger.
I get the two mixed because here's the thing: both those guys combined, LSU could not hit off of them. That's the only time I swear where I've seen LSU just not be able to hit. Period. But yeah, Hagen Smith.
And their Sunday guy would have been Tech's Friday guy. Like they are loaded from starting pitching. They're going to be a tough team to beat.
And the Hagen Smith, I think LSU fans have kind of already tired of hearing Hagen Smith because this is the last 2 years he's given LSU all kinds of problems. I mean, he's the only – and to be honest, when people say LSU can't hit off the lefties, that's the first thing I think about. I mean, he's going to be a dude that will be a first-round pick, in my opinion, maybe even the top 10 pick, because you can't find too many lefties who can just strike out rows and rows of batters. And he wasn't even their ace last year. He actually came out the bullpen for most of the games, and he would just strike out 8 guys like it was nothing, almost like Paul Skeens like. But moving on, is there a team in the SEC right now that I think are maybe people are sleeping on? Maybe it's a team that maybe they lost a few bit of people, but they're still very talented.
I know this sounds weird because they've been rated high in a ton of polls, but I think Texas A&M is a team that a lot of people are kind of sleeping on. They're kind of seeing, same old Texas A&M. They bring in a ton of talent. They were top 5 last year and then really kind of struggled to make the NCAA tournament. I think that they're a team that they bring back a ton of pitching and have a ton of pitching depth. And then they added, obviously I think the biggest piece in the transfer portal, Braden Montgomery, to go along with Jace Lavalette, who had probably a tremendous, one of the best summers I've seen from Team USA, and then kept it rolling in the fall. I think A&M, I know it feels weird saying that they're top 10, but I think that they're a team that a lot of people are kind of sleeping on.
Yeah, I'm taking a big nap on A&M. I think they've got a potent lineup, no doubt. Their lineup is they're gonna rake. They're gonna be right up there with Florida when it comes to runs per game. I just don't believe in their pitching staff. They're like, just because you return a bunch of pitchers who were not very good last year doesn't mean that they're automatically going to be better. Especially when you lose Nate Yeske, who's a phenomenal pitching coach. I don't know. I mean, I'm gonna have to wait and see it. If they can, feel free to prove me wrong, but I just don't see it right now. But I'm gonna go with South Carolina. D1 Baseball had them as 25 in their rankings. They're in my Omaha. I think they're going to make it to Omaha. They have a veteran loaded lineup, and I think that their pitching staff, while it did lose some big names, I think Roman Kimball is in for a big year, and I think that they're going to do some big things this year. Mark Kingston's finally going to break through.
Yeah, Mark Kingston's done a fantastic job at South Carolina. I mean, last year that team was looking scary, and then they kind of I think they dealt with some injuries issues near the end of the season, and
they were decimated. They,
Yeah.
they did
I
not
mean,
handle it
they
very
just
well either.
yeah, they fell off too, and like they still made the supers, but I mean, at full strength. I mean, like I remember watching the LSU South Carolina series. I mean, I really think South Carolina would have won that series if not for the weather and everything like that. I mean, they
Alex,
were
do you
just
think
by
that?
far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
LSU didn't have
because
any
really,
pitching left.
no, because that was the series that we
That was when
who did
Garrett
we lose?
Edwards.
Garrett Edwards, yeah, it was, yeah. I mean, Garrett Edwards. I mean, that was probably by
Skeens got
far.
messed with by the rain too, as well, didn't he? Like his start
Yeah,
was
yeah.
pretty
They cut
short,
his
if I
start
remember.
cut his start short, so they only got like 4 innings out of Skeens. So it really and then Garrett Edwards got hurt, and that was Gavin Guidry's first time coming out of the bullpen was at South Carolina.
Mm. Yeah, and then also I think if I remember correctly, the week before, like I think a few days beforehand, you also lost Shea Shores to a torn UCL as well. So you lost two of your key members of your bullpen in the same week. I mean, it was just a brutal week for LSU, and
And I think
like
Thatcher
even the
Hurd was having a lot of issues around that time too. Like he was
Yeah.
really
yeah
kind of working through a lot of stuff with his mechanics. So he really wasn't the guy he was at the end of the year as well.
right.
Yep.
And then also, I mean, they really should have lost the second game too. I mean, South Carolina blew that second game. I mean, LSU should have lost that series. If not for the weather delay and South Carolina absolutely like crapping the bed in the second game. But my pick for a sleeper, because I think South Carolina, I'm surprised they're even rated that low. I saw that earlier. I was like, there's no way South Carolina is that low. But I think I'm gonna go with Auburn. I really like Auburn's returning a bit of their position players. Ike Irish is coming back. Will Cannon is returning returning into their pitching rotation. I really like Auburn. Auburn's been a solid program that's seen the past few years, and it wouldn't surprise me if they made a push towards Omaha. Because really, last year they had a great team as well, even though they were struggling for a good bit of the year. If they had better pitching last year, I think that team would have made it Omaha. But I think this year they're going to be a little much better team in terms of pitching. And then I think Auburn's still going to be a very good hitting team. And I expect them to make it to Omaha. They're definitely my 8 to make it to Omaha. But I just want to ask you guys this last question about the SEC. Well, there's 2 more I got, but I think the 2 most interesting teams in the SEC right now are Ole Miss and Mississippi State. Both their coaches are on the hot seat. Bianco's on the hot seat. He's been on the hot seat, really. And if he didn't win that national championship, I think he would have been out of there by now. I mean, that national championship, like saved his whole entire time in Ole Miss because remember, he was on the hot seat during the season, and they made up.
He was on the hot seat on Selection Sunday.
Yeah. I mean, but even last year, I think they're going to give him a chance because he won them the Natty the year before. But I think he's going to be in the hot seat, of course. But then you also have the situation of Mississippi State. Their coach seems he's been on the hot seat for the last 2 years after they won that national championship. Lamoni's been compared to Coach O. He's been compared to Gene Chizik. That's for anybody who's kind of unfamiliar with baseball. Maybe making a football reference might give them an idea. The Larry Coker of college baseball, but so you see those 2 jobs opening up at the end of the year?
I never want to call for somebody's job, but I think if I was a gambling man, I would almost bet one of those 2 guys is not going to be there. I mean, for Chris Lemonis, yeah, he won the national championship, but the AD that hired him isn't there anymore. They haven't even been competitive the last 2 years, except for these random series where they beat like how they beat LSU last year, where they're just randomly good for a series, and you're like, why didn't they do this the whole year? But I think that he's doing a lot of things that I think warrant him keeping his job. They brought over the pitching coach from South Carolina. They brought in a few transfers, and I think that the lineup's going to be a lot better this year. But I don't see a world where they're in the top half of the SEC, and I don't see a world where if they're not in the top half of the SEC that Lemonis keeps his job. I think that that's kind of a safe bet right now. But it's just the fall off from those teams is just insane because those are 2 rabid fan bases that over recruit compared to other sports, and it's just insane to kind of see that fall off.
Yeah, it is, and I agree with you on Mississippi State. I mean, honestly, I think they're going to end up last in the SEC. I don't think the morale on that team is very good right now. I don't I don't see them. I think Lamonis may not even make it through the whole year. I mean, he might get fired halfway through the season. And not that I'm saying that he should right now or anything like that, but I just think that's what the reality of the situation is going to be. Bianco, I think, still has some latitude. And I think Ole Miss is going to be improved this year. JT Quinn, the
I
reports
knew
out
you
of.
were gonna bring. I knew you were gonna bring up JT Quinn. That is
I mean,
everybody's favorite talking point is talking about JT Quinn at Ole Miss.
I mean, if there's we'll see if there's a reason for it. Maybe there's not. We'll see. But all the reports are is that he's made big steps and that he's going to be a legit Friday guy, and we'll see. Um, you know, Will Furness, I expect to take a big step forward. He was huge for them last year as a freshman. For LSU fans, that's Eddie Furness's son. And but I think Ole Miss is gonna. I'm not picking them to win the SEC or anything like that, but I think they'll be a middle of the road SEC team somewhere between 7 and maybe 5th best SEC team, and make the SEC tournament, make the NCAA tournament. But yeah, I don't have much hope for Mississippi State this year.
But I think even Ole Miss, though, I feel like if they are still middle of the pack, I think that's still like would be enough for Ole Miss to kind of pull the plug. Like, thank you for everything you've done, but it's time to move in a different direction. Because especially now that LSU is back to being LSU, you have Texas, Oklahoma join the conference next year, and really, when I think of baseball in terms of a sport, what a sport means to a state. I mean, what Mississippi baseball is like, it's basically like football in Texas and basketball in Indiana. Like, that's the first sport I think of when it comes to Mississippi. Not football. I think it's baseball. I mean, Mississippi State, of course, in my opinion, probably is what sparked interest in baseball in the SEC. I mean, we're starting with Ron Polk. There's a reason why he's called the godfather of SEC baseball. Ole Miss, even though they really hadn't had the success that maybe like a Mississippi State has had, Ole Miss has produced a lot of great players, produced a lot of great teams. Their issue has always been, can they get to Omaha? That was always the issue with Ole Miss. But I mean, I think Ole Miss is like to me, they're like one of the more traditional teams in the SEC, like at Arkansas and LSU, because of the success they've had. But then also Mississippi is full of talent. Mississippi guys don't leave the state. I mean, you not only just in baseball, but in any sport, football, you see the same thing. Like, guys will rather go to Ole Miss and Mississippi State than go to Alabama. I mean, there's a reason why LSU and Alabama, some of these other schools, the powers in the SEC, really haven't been able to pull kids out of Mississippi because those guys don't really like to leave the state. And I think that, with all that talent in the state, you have to be better. And I think at Mississippi State, you have a 15,000 seat stadium, but if your team's not good, people are not going to show up. So that hurts your money back, basically. And Ole Miss, kind of the same thing. And I think if those teams aren't the top half of the SEC, I think you can see both those jobs even open. Even Mississippi State, even they finished like 6th or 7th, I still don't think that's enough for Mississippi State fans, especially how good they were when they won the national championship. Like, they really have not lived up to the standards of what Mississippi State should be. But last question: who is your Player of the Year candidate in the SEC?
I'll let you go first, Jake.
Uh,
I think I know who you're going to say, though.
Who?
I think you're going to say Jace Lavalette.
I don't know. I really like Brody Dene. I know that that's kind of way out of left field, and I don't think he has a chance to win SEC Player of the Year. I think he has a chance to be the catcher of the year in the SEC, which I think is a tremendous accolade. But I don't know. I think Jace Lavalette. Yeah, I'll go Jace Lavalette. It feels like a better answer than Brody Dene.
Yeah, I mean, Jace Lavalette certainly is going to be in that discussion. Along with Ethan Petrie and Charlie Condon and Ike Irish. But I think it's Jack Caglione, at Florida. I mean, if he's if he can repeat what he did last year, which 33 home runs is a lot to expect. But if he can be 25, 28 home runs and have an ERA, just south of 4, I think he's going to win the Golden Spikes.
Ethan Petrie, I think is another name too that I would feel embarrassed if we didn't mention him as well. I think he's another tremendous talent in the SEC. But I think we really are kind of in the golden age of SEC baseball, just with the talent that's there this year. There's just a ton of talent, big league talent that we haven't. It's not that we haven't seen it in past, but there just doesn't feel like a far and away player like Dylan Cruz was last year. There's a ton of guys that I think are A's.
Yeah. And really, I could just name 3 players. Obviously, Jack Caglione. There's not many people could do what he does in terms of hitting and pitching. So I think people are like more enamored with that, especially with guys like Shohei Ohtani in the majors. Like if you see a guy who can not only rake but also pitch with an ERA a 3.50, and then also have like 100 strikeouts and have a winning record of like 10-2. They're going to give them the benefit of the doubt and give it to him. And really, if it wasn't for Dylan Cruz, Jack Caglione had a strong case to win it last year. In my opinion, he probably should have won it. Just because I think they just gave it to Dylan Cruz. As fantastic as Dylan Cruz was, he was the best player in college baseball last year. But I think Jack Caglione had a better year, and I think he was probably more deserving of winning the Golden Spikes. But I'm going to go with Jack Caglione, Ethan Petrie, and then also I'm surprised you guys even mentioned him, but Tommy White. Tommy White. Here's the thing. He had he led the nation in RBIs with 105 and had near 20.
Yeah, but he had Dylan Cruz on base every time.
But here's the thing. He also had his shoulder pop out 20 different times during the year. He was playing.
What was the stat in Omaha last year about his batting average with Dylan Cruz on
He was batting over 600 with Dylan Cruz on base.
It was something outrageous. We're going to have to see how he hits without Dylan Cruz being on base every time.
It doesn't matter. If you're still the way he played last year with a hurt shoulder, that was if people forget, he had a bad shoulder. It popped out 20 different times, including the dog pile. Which
remember in Round Rock he had that brace on, Alex.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He didn't have a ton of movement in his shoulder. So yeah, but I think it's weird. I think his numbers dip just because Dylan Cruz isn't going to be on base every single time to get hit in. I think he has.
Well, not just season. That, but I just don't think they're going to have. They're not going to be able to protect him as well. Tommy White was really the protection for Dylan Cruz. And this year, you really need Bear Jones to step up and be that guy behind Tommy White. We'll see if it happens. And if it does happen, then Tommy White's got an excellent shot. He's one of the best hitters in the country. We'll see.
I think at the top of the lineup, though, I think you have a lot of protection because you have Josh Pearson. I think he'll be improved this year, and he always takes professional at bats. Remember, you also have Mac Beanham coming over from Arizona, who's also very good behind the plate, and then also is a very patient batter. I think there's going to be LSU won't have the power like they did last year, but I think they have enough hitters where I think it can protect Tommy White. And I just pulled this up because I found it in my notes, but with a hurt shoulder, Tommy White had a batting average 3.74 with 24 doubles, 24 homers, 105 RBIs, and 64 runs. That with a hurt shoulder, just imagine if he had a healthy shoulder, would those numbers go up? Because last year was he also had the benefit of also having a lot of guys who could hit from 1 through 9, but there's not many guys who could do what Tommy White did last year with a shoulder that was popping out 24/7. But I'm gonna move on. We're gonna move on out of the SEC and talk about I do have one more question. I just realized in my notes. But speaking of Arkansas, is this the year Arkansas finally gets over the hump and doesn't drop the ball?
No, I think that there's just so many teams. Wake is going to be, I think, a tough team to beat, even outside of the SEC. And then I just have a feeling that someone's kind of going to come out of nowhere and really kind of take over by storm. Maybe like an ECU or a Southern Miss or somebody like that, where they'll have all all the breaks kind of fall their way. I don't see it. It's weird. This doesn't feel like as talented of a team as Arkansas is of the past. I mean, yeah, they have that staff, but I don't think this Arkansas team can win the national championship.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll
it's the
disagree
year
with
then.
that and say that they're talented enough to win the national championship. But like you said, it's just so hard. I mean, it's hard to say that they are going to, especially when they haven't done it before. They're talented enough to, but I don't know if they will or not.
I remember it's also the 8-year rule because the 2016 Coastal Carolina, then 8 years before that was Fresno State. So people are wondering if another mid-major might win it. Speaking because it's the 8-year rule. But that's the
Don't
last
remind me
question I have
about
to ask.
Coastal Carolina.
I know. I know. Jay Johnson doesn't be reminded of that. People forget that Coastal Carolina beat Jay Johnson when he was at Arizona in the finals. I mean, people forget that Johnny Johnson didn't really do anything at Arizona. Well, he was in the championship game, and really, if he wins the championship game against Coastal Carolina, does he leave Arizona? So Coastal Carolina maybe a pain in LSU's fans' ears from 2016, but
it still pissed him off, Alex. Remember in Omaha when someone brought up about being here before? He still kind of gave like a look of like it was still kind of just like it was still sticking with him. So he definitely hasn't lost the edge from 2016.
Yeah, but moving on to the ACC, speaking of Wake Forest, even the Wake Forest lost a lot of guys from last year. I know they brought in Chase Burns through the transfer portal, but what makes Wake Forest such an intriguing team this year, and why they're coming back as the number one team despite losing all those guys? I mean, they lost a lot. I mean, more than LSU did.
Yeah, I think the pitching, they have developed, I think, the best program for pitching in the country that, hey, you go here, listen to what we're going to do. We're going to get you drafted. It's weird because they're kind of like LSU where they lost kind of their ace guy. And I think that they got even better. And then Nick Kurtz at first base is another tremendous talent. Seaver King is another guy from Wingate that I think is going to take the college baseball world by storm. He's coming over from, I think, either a D2 or a D3. I think he's a name that you really have to watch. But I think just the faith in their pitching lab is why everybody's so high on Wake Forest. I mean, they got a ton. It almost feels like they're just building these guys out of a factory. They all come out and have like a set role that they do the best in the country. They have a guy who throws hard. They have a guy who throws soft. They have an eat-em-up hitting guy. I mean, they've built like a creative player staff this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I expect big things from Seaver King, and Nick Kurtz is another name to watch out for. Mm-hmm. I think for Golden Spikes, I mean, he's gonna be right up there in that conversation. And they're bringing back Josh Hartle. So while they did lose, Rhett Lauder and those guys, but Josh Hartle's back. You bring in Chase Burns. Michael Massey is probably going to take the step from the bullpen into the starting rotation. You still got Parker Roll in there, who's, I mean, I'm pretty sure he does bumps of cocaine there on the mound. I mean, he's an electric factory. And so he's ready to go, and he'll be closing out games for them. And there's a lot of talent and a lot to like about Wake Forest.
And they play at a gorgeous field that's getting upgrades too. So it's going to be another cathedral out there in Winston-Salem. So I think there's a lot to like about Wake Forest.
Hopefully they push the fence back.
And get rid of the gold turf.
Yeah.
I don't think they need to push the fence back because I don't think they need to push the fence back because they're still raking in the SEC tournament. They're still raking in the College World Series. But I think Wake Forest. I know people got pissed off about the pitching lab, especially LSU fans, because they kept hearing it from all the announcers and everything. And really, Wake Forest, they're not really necessarily unique from other programs because I think a lot of programs basically do the same thing that Wake Forest does. But what Wake Forest has done, they really market themselves and say, hey, we got the pitching lab. And they might as well trademark it because it seems like the more they kept repeating it, the more people are like, maybe I should go there to pitch. It might make me a first-round draft pick. And you kind of saw that with LSU. We're the powerhouse. We got the intimidator. Jay Johnson, of course, is a master recruiter. I mean, really, for you to become a powerhouse.
I will say
just
this
in any
about Jay
sport.
Johnson's recruiting. He has probably, I think, the easiest recruiting pitch in the country right now. He could pretty like. That's what I said. I think he kind of set himself up, but he truly has probably the easiest recruiting pitch. It's like, hey, want to play in front of meaningful fans with the best facilities in college baseball and have a chance to play for a national championship. So we don't know how good of a recruiter Jay Johnson is because the LSU brass has made it such a marketable place.
I don't know, because even at Arizona, he was still recruiting the hell out of everybody. I mean, he's still bringing all kinds of guys. And also he was playing in a stadium. He was playing in a minor league stadium, High Corbett Stadium. Because I know this because my dad used to coach Arizona. I was actually there when they won the national championship. I remember all the hype around that team because that's the first time Arizona had been that good at baseball in a very long time, even before the season. But they were playing in a minor league stadium. It's not. I mean. Even though Alex Box maybe will be a little bit behind, that's still a better place to play than High Corbett Field. And I think, and he was still recruiting the hell out of, and he got Jacob Berry. He's still getting all the top recruits. His job's just gotten easier because he's at LSU. I mean, you can say the same thing about any program. I mean, Brian Kelly, I mean, it's easy for him. All you got to do is drive 5 minutes down the road. Oh, here's the top safety in the country. I know that we're bringing up football in a baseball conversation, but that just shows you how easy it is when you have all the resources that you have. And if you just market yourself, like I was saying this earlier, if you just market yourself and just have a plan, good things will happen. You're seeing that at Wake Forest. You're seeing that at Tennessee because they're seen as the bad boys of college baseball. And really, we hadn't seen the team do the stuff that Tennessee was doing with their antics and everything. So, if you have a good marketing pitch, you can win anywhere. But I want to ask about Wake Forest because I think we all agree that Wake Forest is the favorite to win the ACC. But is there a sleeper in the ACC right now? Because the ACC, they have a lot of good teams, but I think people don't necessarily pay attention to the ACC because really all they think about is Wake Forest at the moment.
I would say Clemson's, I think, another one. They have one of the deeper staffs in the country too as well. Virginia, I mean, they are another team that just always you can kind of seem to pencil in Omaha, and I think they have a lot more talent than they had last year. But I'll go kind of under the radar. I think Florida State has the talent, and Link Jarrett kind of coming through and building his program. I think they're going to take tremendous strides forward. But there's a lot to like about the ACC. I think it's a lot closer than SEC fans realize that the SEC and ACC are really close in terms of baseball talent.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with Virginia. I think that would be my sleeper team, I guess, you would say. But I'm not even really sure that they're a sleeper team. I mean, they were in Omaha last year. I mean, they've got a ton of talent. Griff O'Farrell at shortstop for them is one of the best defensive shortstops in the nation. And he was a ton of fun to watch in Omaha last year. And they've got a ton of talent coming back. So I would say if it's not Wake Forest, then I would go Virginia.
Yeah, I have to agree with you about Virginia. I mean, Virginia, last year in the Omaha, I actually had Wake Forest and Virginia meet each other up in the College World Series finals. Of course, that didn't work out because LSU did end up knocking off Wake Forest. I mean, I picked Wake Forest to beat LSU. And a lot of people that I knew was like, how can you pick an ACC team over LSU, who's the best team in the SEC? It's like, because all of Wake Forest's strengths have to be LSU's weaknesses because LSU did not have the depth at the time, and Wake Forest had a lot more. Luckily, their bullpen came through for them. And then obviously Tommy White, probably having one of the greatest moments in college baseball history with his 2-run shot to left field that eventually catapulted LSU to the College World Series finals. But Virginia, I thought a lot of people were sleeping on, and I thought they had a very deep team. But if they don't choke if they don't choke in that Florida game, because they had that game won, and if they had pulled that guy out of there after he was shown that he was getting tired, forgot the guy's name. He looked really tired, and their coach decided not to pull him out. I'm like, what are they doing? And then that's when they Florida started raking, and that was it. And that's when I knew, okay, well, there goes another pick. But Virginia, I really like Griffin O'Farrell. I think they have a lot of guys coming back, and Virginia's always a team that you're not gonna you're always going to give them the benefit of the doubt because has been there. They've been one of the more consistent teams in college baseball the last 10 to 15 years, and they're always going to have a team that can compete for a national title. But is there a player of the year pick for you guys out of the ACC?
I think outside of Nick Kurtz and Griffo Farrell, I think Casey Salke is another name to watch out of Virginia. I think he's a truly underrated talent. Hit just a hair under 300. I think he takes big step forwards, and I think he's one of the best defensive right fielders in all of the ACC. So he's kind of the one name to watch out for. And then Virginia Tech has a few guys that can really swing it, like Christian Martin. I think that he's kind of another guy that you really have to kind of look at because I think his stats are going to be just so jaw dropping. I don't think Virginia Tech is going to be close to the tournament just due to that staff, but Christian Martin, I think, is another name to watch out for ACC Player of the Year.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Vance Honeycutt from North Carolina. I think he had a bit of a sophomore slump at the plate, but he is the best defensive center fielder in college baseball. And if he can recapture a little bit of that magic he had his freshman year at the plate, I think he's got a good shot to be ACC Player of the Year.
Cam Canarella is another name from Clemson. He's kind of who I think he's a step above Honeycutt, Alex, but you can't really go wrong with either of those two guys.
Yeah, I'm probably going to go with Nick Kurtz from Wake Forest. I think he's going to have another big year, and also helps that he has a short field. But Nick Kurtz, I think he's going to have another big time year for Wake Forest. May not get to 32, but I think he's going to have at least 25 plus. I mean, he's a big time hitter, and really, if let's say if he's draft eligible last year, I think he would have been a first round pick because he's just had a unique power that not a lot of hitters have. Um, but yeah, moving on to the Big 12. Who do you guys like out of the Big 12? I mean, obviously, this is Texas last year in the Big 12. Hopefully, they want to leave on a high note, win the Big 12 championship. But then you also have TCU, who a lot of people are high on. West Virginia is kind of one of those sleeper teams. Texas Tech is going to be as strong as always. So, who do you guys like out of the Big 12 right now?
I think the favorite has to be TCU. I mean, they returned Cole Kleckler, who was their Friday guy as a freshman, Ben Abel, who was their Saturday guy as a freshman. They both pitched the two super regional games. And then they bring in Peyton Tolley from Wake Forest, who is going to start at first base for them as well as being their Sunday guy. And I think around a lot of staffs in the country, he'd kind of be a Saturday guy. But they return Carson Bowen, Anthony Silva up the middle. But I think kind of the dark horse in the Big 12 is Oklahoma State. I mean, they have a ton of question marks from a staff standpoint, but the Oklahoma State hitters, I think, are truly one of the best in the country and definitely tops of the Big 12. So those are kind of the two that I'm circling.
Here you go again with Oklahoma State. Oh, God. Alex.
I actually like Texas and the Big 12. I think, TCU is certainly the favorite, but I think Texas ends up winning that conference. I mean, you got Tanner Witt, LeBaron Johnson, on the front end of that staff, Porter Brown. There's a ton to like. They have another their shortstop, Jalen. I can't remember his last name right now.
Jalen
Flores.
He was draft eligible. That was a big get for Texas too as well. He hit 180 last year, but he's going to take a huge step forward.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what I've been hearing too. And so I think, I like Texas to win the Big 12.
Yeah, I really like TCU too. I think last year, even though they kind of weren't really necessarily the best hitting team, I think last year near the end they showed that they can be one of the best teams in college baseball. And I think since they have a lot of guys coming back, I mean, I really like TCU. I don't think they're necessarily going to win it all, but I expect them to be back in Omaha. I really do. But is there a sleeper right now in the Big 12? Jake, I think you're going to say Oklahoma State. Am I correct about that, or is there another team?
Kansas State just to kind of talk about all the teams, Kansas State, I think, is doing a lot of stuff really, really under the radar that's starting to kind of get picked up again. And then West Virginia, I mean, they should have won the Big 12. They got swept in the last series against Texas, and they were co-champs. And they returned the best player from that, J.J. Weatherhurt, the Big 12 Player of the Year. So I think that those are kind of the two sleeper teams that aren't traditional powers, but Kansas State and West Virginia are my two sleepers.
Yeah, I was going to say West Virginia. I mean, J.J. Weatherholt is the best player in the Big 12, and one of the best players in the country. So yeah, I think he might be able to will that team. I mean, he was hitting like over 400 for a lot of the year. He was battling Dylan Cruz with the best battling average in college baseball for a lot of the year. And so yeah, I think if there's a team outside of TCU or Texas or kind of one of the favorites, I think it's West Virginia.
Yeah, I think West Virginia is going to be another team to watch out for. I think West Virginia can kind of sneak in there. I mean, obviously they have probably one of the best all-around hitters in J.J. Weatherholt. But also I think you can't really sleep on Texas Tech either. Texas Tech year in and year out has shown that they're one of the more consistent teams in college baseball. But yeah, I think just like the last year off of the Big 12 as Oklahoma and Texas are leaving. And I think this is probably going to be a fun year in the Big 12 because this is really the only conference where like, dude, besides the SEC, it's like, you can't really pick it. There's really no wrong answer for the Big 12 champion because the top half of the league is so good that, I mean, they all have bring something to the table. I think the Big 12 is one of the harder conferences to kind of pick. But is there a certain player that people need to watch? Probably outside of JJ Weatherholt, but besides JJ Weatherholt, is another player we should watch out for?
Will Gasparino from Texas. I think he's the projected right fielder. He is, from everything I've heard out of their camp, the real deal as a true freshman. His dad is a scout from the Dodgers, and they said that he has a really, really advanced approach from his age. He's a huge guy, too. I think he's like 6'5", 6'6". That's the name that everybody keeps coming back to is Will Gasparino, and it really wouldn't surprise me to see him win Big 12 Freshman of the Year. He's the guy that I'm definitely circling in the Big 12.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. Maybe a name that a lot of people, especially if you watch Omaha, know. Anthony Silva at TCU. He had a big time freshman year, and he's coming back. And I think they're going to expect a lot out of him. Defensively, he's one of the best shortstops in the country. And I think he's going to take a big step offensively. And so I think he's definitely a player to watch.
Jake, no love for Oklahoma State. Since we're on the Big 12, I got to ask you about that because I keep seeing every time I open Twitter, it's something about you in Oklahoma State, you about lucky teams that can pitch well or they can't. I don't know, like there's a lot of memes going around. So can you kind of explain
that's the team that all the South Carolina fans love to kind of point to is like, hey, this team doesn't have any pitching, but they can really rake. I think that Oklahoma State, one, they get to play in the Big 12 and they get the luxury of facing a lot of these staffs that I think are a step below the SEC. So they're going to have gaudy numbers. And then Brate, it truly is just a launching pad out there. I don't even think Oklahoma State's a dark horse. I think that they're a clear step behind TCU and Texas, but I think that they're going to be a third team in the Big 12. I really, really like Oklahoma State a ton. And I could see them twice in the first 2 weeks. I'm really excited about that.
My favorite thing about Oklahoma State is that they have all these home run records from like the 80s, and they had like Robin Ventura on their team. I forgot the other guys, like the all-time leading like home run hitter, I think in the single season. I forgot the guy's name. And if you look at all like those teams, and they never won a national championship, and they went to Omaha, but they just never won it. And that's probably one of the funniest things I've ever seen. It's like, how do you have all these guys, but then like you just can't win in Omaha?
Well, I think they've only been to Omaha 2 or 3 times in the super regional era. So they're not like going to Omaha a ton. You almost kind of forget that they don't go to Omaha because it always seems like they're a team that somebody beats along the way, like Oral Roberts last year, Arkansas 2 years ago, that they're just kind of a stepping stone as, yeah, Oklahoma State's good and this team's beat them, so they're good. But yeah, there's a lot to like about this Oklahoma State team. I mean, they have probably the most big league staff in the country. I mean, they have Holiday, Robin Ventura comes around. They have a deep analytics department. So there's a lot to like about Oklahoma State.
Yeah, they had Pete Incaviglia. I don't know. That's really Italian. His name is Pete Incaviglia, and he's like the all-time home run king in college baseball history. And then Robin Ventura, who has the NCAA record for most consecutive games with a hit. Yeah, and both those guys played in the 80s, and They only went to Omaha. Well, they only went to Omaha twice in the '80s, and they had both those guys. It just shows you how hard it is to win in college baseball. I think that's why it's one of the most unpredictable sports and most unpredictable sports in the NCAA. I mean, you have Fresno State having to win their conference championship barely to even get to the tournament, and then they somehow barely won the whole thing, beating all these great teams. Um, but yeah, moving on to the Pac-12. This is kind of a sad year for the Pac-12. I mean, the Pac-12's last sport will be actually in baseball, and then once July 1st comes around, that's a wrap. So who do you guys like out of the Pac-12 right now? This kind of I'm kind of sad about this because I'm like outside of the SEC, I'm a big Pac-12 guy because I grew up on the West Coast. And so I just remember seeing like the football and baseball and basketball. And now it's just kind of like I'm gonna tell my kids like, hey, this is the Pac-12. The Pac-12 is gonna be like the Southwest Conference in my opinion.
Yeah,
But
I still get.
I mean, that's really
about
what it
letting
is.
see
Like,
that.
yeah, like my dad talk like sometimes he would talk about the Southwest Conference, like all these great teams because my dad's a college coach. And then that's gonna be like the Pac-12 is gonna be the Southwest Conference for our kids. So, but anyway, who you guys like out of the Pac-12? Sorry about that. Going on this locally about the Pac-12.
I'm going to be honest. I've been so focused on the SEC, Texas, and ACC that I really don't know a ton about the Pac-12. I know Travis Bazzana is one of the best players in the country, and the Oregon State's a really, really deep team. But outside of that, I like a little bit of what Arizona State does, but I don't think I've done enough research to even ballpark where they would finish in the Pac-12 other than their roster. But other than Oregon State, I'm really kind of out of my element there out west.
Yeah, I mean, I've looked at some of it. I think Oregon is another team to watch out for there, but I think Oregon State's certainly the favorite. We talk about Travis Bazzana. They brought in a really highly touted freshman who's going to play third base for them. I can't remember his name right now. It escapes me. But Mitch Canham's got another reloaded team. Their big question mark. I mean, you got Gavin Turley and Micah McDowell in the outfield, and LSU fans should remember those guys from the Baton Rouge Regional. They tore it up in the Baton Rouge Regional, and their lineup is stacked. Their biggest question marks are going to be on the pitching staff, but I think they're going to have enough pitching, and I really like their lineup.
Any what are you guys' thoughts about the two LA schools? Because I know we talked about this a little bit before the pod, but how do you think those two LA schools are going to fare, USC and UCLA? Because I know UCLA, they're going to return. They're always going to have a talented team. I know they've lost a couple of guys to the transfer portal, including Gage Jump, who really didn't pitch that much for him because of injuries, but he left. And he's going to be a big time pitcher for LSU. And then also USC, they were kind of one of the teams that got snubbed out of the tournament last year. And a lot of people are expecting them to have a big year. And that's saying a lot because USC, for a very long time was the power of college baseball, but they really haven't done much since the early 2000s.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with USC. I think that this is the first year, at least that I can remember, where they have some kind of expectation of making it to the NCAA tournament. That's something that we really haven't seen. I mean, they're investing a ton into that program, and they have some really talented guys. His name is escaping me, but he's an outfielder for them that played on the football team last year, and he really kind of tore it up. But I think that those are going to be two programs to kind of watch because donors love to have success when they go into new chapters. So I think tracking USC and UCLA as they move into the Big Ten this year, it's probably going to be the last quote unquote easy year they have to make it to the tournament. So I think that those are two teams to really kind of follow closely.
Yeah, USC is definitely on the come up. They were down bad, but they're on their way back up. They're not anywhere close to where they were under Rod Dito, but they're getting back there. And UCLA, like you said, they're always going to be talented, but they lost a lot from that big time freshman class they got in a couple of years ago. Guys like Thatcher Hurd and Gage Jump, that were part of that class that have left. And just last year was a really disappointing year for them. I mean, I picked them to win the Pac-12, and they didn't come close. And So I think they're kind of an interesting team. So we'll see how the season goes for them.
Mm-hmm. And what about the? Because I know you mentioned, I know one of you guys mentioned this earlier about Arizona State, but how you guys see those two Arizona schools? Um, because I know Arizona kind of had a slow start to the season, then they kind of came on hot late, and eventually won the Pac-12. Then Arizona State, they're kind of deal with some. I know that Arizona State used to be a power in college baseball, but they really haven't done much in the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, Arizona, I think, is going to be a team where I think that they're going to be a lot like Arkansas in the SEC, where they had so many breaks kind of go their way that it's almost going to be tough to kind of replicate that. But when you look at Arizona State, they have, I think, one of the youngest staffs in Power Five. So answering a lot of those question marks that Coach Willie Bloomquist is going to have to work through and find his staff. But Ryan Campos at Arizona State, I think, is a name to really kind of watch out for. But there's just a ton of question marks at so many of these Pac-12 teams outside of Oregon State, and it's they're all kind of just blending together. It seems like it's like, yeah, USC has this, but they struggle with this, and then Arizona's like, yeah, they can hit the ball, but their pitching's really young. So I think that it's going to be probably one of the most wide open conferences in the Pac-12 outside of Oregon State. But I think those Arizona schools are definitely going to be in the upper brass of it.
Yeah, I know Coach Rooney is big on Arizona State this year. I think that they've got a pretty good team. They're another team that's kind of on the come up. They're another program that's on the come up after they were down pretty bad. But another big time power out west that's coming back up. And Arizona, I feel like it's just always got a solid squad. Even with Jay Johnson being gone, they've always got a really solid squad. So I think they'll be in the upper half of the Pac-12 for sure.
Yeah, and speaking of Arizona State, I'm hoping those schools come back to where they were. Arizona. Everything about Arizona is that like they'll have a couple years where like they're kind of so, but then eventually they'll have one of those teams where they're like, oh, this team's really good. You can see this team going Omaha. Arizona State. I remember when I was growing up, the very first college baseball game I ever went to was Tulane versus Arizona State, and Tulane at the time was one of the best teams in the country. They were a top 10 program every year when I was growing up, and then Arizona State of course, was a top 10 program. And so I'm used to seeing Arizona State being good, but like, man, as of late, they really have not lifted the standards, especially when all the guys would come through their program, especially a guy like Barry Bonds. All the players have, I think Dustin Pedroia went there too, if I'm correct.
Yeah, he
Did he
did.
go to Arizona State? Yeah, he
Yeah,
did.
he went to
Yeah.
Arizona State. Yeah.
I mean, they've had all kinds of players go to that program, so it's kind of surprising that a program with all those players have kind of gone through that program and you know, really have not played up to that standard. It's kind of surprising. I mean, they probably have more to claim than a lot of different programs around the country. But going back to USC, Austin Overn is his name. I know you mentioned he led the country with 14 triples. I think he's going to be
Yeah,
my.
he's a super fast guy.
Yeah, I mean he's good, and then
He
I think
plays
he's
like he's on
probably one.
fire. It almost seems like.
Yeah, I think he's going to be my pick for the player of the year because I remember I was like, yeah, it's like I forgot the guy's name because I remember he had like a bunch of triples, but he's going to be my pick for player of the year in the Pac-12. But what about you guys? Have you guys kind of? I know it's it's a lot of teams to cover, and usually like if guys like us who are from the South, sometimes we forget about the West Coast. But is there any player of the year candidates out in the Pac-12 that you guys are really interested in?
Malcolm Moore for Stanford is, I think, the name that a lot of people are going to try and gravitate towards. He seems to be kind of the only guy left from all these big Omaha runs. That meme of John Travolta where he's kind of looking around. I think that that's what Malcolm Moore is kind of doing. But again, David Esker always gets the most out of his guys, and they're the only team in the country that's been to Omaha the last 3 years. So I think that Malcolm Moore is kind of a name that I watch outside of Travis Bazzana, but it really is kind of Travis Bazzana's that were to lose.
Yeah, I agree. I was definitely going to say Travis Bazzana. I mean, he is the best player in the Pac-12, and
Yeah.
honestly, not sure it's particularly close. I mean, he's probably going to be a top 5 draft pick come this summer, and he's a ton of fun to watch.
Yeah, I was going to say Travis Bazzana, but I just want to make it a little interesting because Travis Bazzana. I mean, we're all there for the Baton Rouge regional. I mean, he was awesome during that regional, include him and Gavin Turley. Um, but and I think that's one of the reasons why Oregon State, in my opinion, will be a team in Omaha because Oregon State has all these guys like Travis Bazzana, and they're coached very well. I mean, you would think that after losing one of the greatest coaches of all time, they would kind of take a dip, but they really haven't. And in a few years' time, they're already shown that they're going to be one of the elite teams in college baseball. But kind of breaking away to the Big Ten. I got you. Because I know you guys have to leave pretty soon, but going to the Big Ten, how will some of these Pac-12 teams benefit the Big Ten?
I think that it's going to raise the profile of baseball. Whenever you get four programs that really do care about college baseball coming in, I think that it raises kind of the profile of the country. But I think that we're starting to see a lot of these Big Ten teams invest into college baseball. The Ohio States, the Michigans, those people. I think that they're going to take big step forwards with this money coming in. But again, I really worry about the travel for those teams. I know Oregon and Oregon State are a little bit used to it, but USC and UCLA, I think the travel is just going to kill them.
Yeah, I think those teams, Oregon, I think, and the LA schools are going to really run that conference, but they're really going to raise the play. I hope what's going to happen is that those teams are going to really run the conference from a baseball perspective, and then kind of force the hand of some of these other Big Ten programs to really up their game to meet the challenge of these other West Coast teams. But we'll see. I mean, those West Coast teams certainly have advantages that the rest of the Big Ten doesn't, and that they can actually play year round. They're not frozen over, for most of the year.
Yeah, I think so too. But kind of going to one last question because I know time's running low, but speaking of the 8-year rule, because I mean, it's kind of, every 8 years, seem like the last decade, it's been a mid-major team that's shocked everyone and won the College World Series. You saw that with Fresno State in 2008. You saw that with Coastal Carolina in 2016. But is there any mid-majors outside of East Carolina? Because I think East Carolina is going to be the obvious choice. But are there any mid-majors outside of East Carolina that you can see making a push that have the talent and have all the talent and all the pieces to make a run, not only to Omaha, but maybe even win the title in Omaha?
I'm going to go with a team that's kind of controversial if they're mid-major or not, Iowa. I mean, they play in probably a one-bid league, so I think they calculate as a mid-major in college baseball. But they have truly a big league staff with Brody Beck coming in as their Saturday guy that I think is a luxury that a lot of teams don't have. But I think Iowa, if you're going to circle that team that, hey, outside of the SEC and ACC, who gets through, Iowa definitely.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go with a true mid-major. Although I agree with Jake that the Big Ten is a mid-major conference until the West Coast schools get there. But I'm going to go with Campbell. I'm a big fan of the Campbell Camels. Roll Humps. I think that they've got a really good squad, a really underrated, overlooked squad this year, and I look for them to really make some noise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have a couple. I think Dallas Baptist is another team that you always have to watch out for, especially with the pitching staff they have every year. And I think they have the talent to even make a run to Omaha and even win it. I think another team you have to watch it for. Alex already said Campbell, so I'm going to go with another team. UC Santa Barbara. They're a team that apparently a lot of people are very high on, and really the top 3 or 4 teams of the Big West are all very good. Cal State Fullerton, even though they're not the same Cal State Fullerton as years past, I still think Cal State Fullerton is one of those programs you can't sleep on. UC San Diego.
Hawaii's another one out west that I think they take big steps forward.
Yeah, and UC San Diego, I think they can make the tournament because it was a first year D1. But last year they were like first or second in the Big West, and they beat like teams like USC and UCLA. I think last year, I know they beat USC, but I'm not sure about. They probably beat a couple others too. But I remember UC San Diego was another team that shocked a lot of people last year. But yeah, that's going to about wrap it up for the show, guys. Thank you so much for taking the time out of the night, and I would say day, but it's night time right now. But while we're shooting this, but thanks, Jake, and thanks, Alex, for joining me on my podcast. Their Twitter handles are right on their things. CBC, Jake, McKay, Alex.
MCK.
For Alex is MCK, yeah. And then for Alex Day, it's Radio Man Day. So just find them on Twitter. They're always going to be tweeting on college baseball. They're very knowledgeable, and Jake might make a few hot takes here and there. You might get some Oklahoma State memes.
I'm right
and also,
most of the time. I called Boston
sure-
College and Kentucky last year when
I don't know
everybody
about
was
most of
laughing
the time. You are right some of the time. I'm not gonna say most of the time.
I'll say this: just stay away from his football takes. How about that? I mean, didn't you pick Mississippi State to finish second in the SEC West?
I didn't account for their coach being a moron and getting fired in the first year. I don't think anybody ever accounts for that. Hey, you were one of the prodigies of one of the greatest air raid coaches ever. We're gonna not
That's
run
true.
the air raid anymore.
I was surprised by that. I was surprised they didn't. I would say not run the air raid, but like keep some components of the air raid. They didn't do that. But speaking of
They ran the
baseball,
ball like
Alex,
30 times against A&M. Like it
That's
doesn't
true,
make sense.
and then of course Alex is a big time LSU guy. He's he's a Baton Rouge native. So if you're an LSU baseball fan, make sure to follow Alex as well. Well, I'm your host, Grant Chachere, and I'll see you guys next week. Peace, y'all.
Thanks again, Grant.
Yeah, no problem.